in the preliminary report, it says that the fuel switches went from run to cut off like within a second. Like, do you think it's even possible?
Yeah, that's a good question. We know that there are several issues there. One is with respect to the granularity of the way time is marked on the recorder. It's possible that they both moved at the same time, just within a millisecond or two of each other, which may have triggered this recording of time on one side or the other of the 1 second mark, if that makes sense. Essentially simultaneously, but it could have shown up as being a second apart. We don't think that that's likely from a human perspective, whether it's possible. I've not personally done those tests. I can tell you that it doesn't seem likely. What does seem likely, however, is that the computer itself can trigger that change, certainly within a second. And so that fits a little bit closer to the theories that are currently being discussed with respect to shorts and or automated or uncommanded changes in the computer system.
Ronnie, what are these theories about the short? Like, how do they explain the work?
Yeah. So one of the current theories that's being explored among several others is this issue of water leaks in water lines underneath the forward and aft lavatories of the plane, including the galley areas. Those are areas that are over what's referred to as an EE bay, and those are areas in which computer equipment is housed. We know from prior FAA and Boeing documents publicly available that there have been reports in the field of water lines leaking into the EE bays, causing computer equipment to become wet and in some cases having to be replaced. That's something that has gone back in the documents at least as far back as 2016 and perhaps earlier. The most recent directive that we've seen was to take effect about 6 months after our crash, which obviously would not have helped us in this case. But essentially what can happen is water from faulty couplings can leak into areas that were not properly waterproofed at the time of manufacture. And that water can leak into the equipment bays and cause the computers to become wet. If that happens, according to the FAA, those leaks can cause electrical shorts, which can lead to the loss of computers and equipment critical for safety and flight.
Ronnie, like, whom responsibility do you think the like this issue was, like the water leak? Like, was it only Boeing or only Air India or both of them?
In terms of responsibility for the leaks,
Yeah, in terms of like keeping an eye about the water leaks, like if something like that is happening, or like, what could have been done to prevent it?
okay. So the manufacturer of the plane obviously is responsible for defects that can exist in the plane at the time it leaves the manufacturer. So in this case, if the couplings were defective at the time they left Boeing, then Boeing could be held responsible for those. Similarly, if Boeing failed to install proper waterproofing and sealing in areas over these EE bays, they can also be responsible for that if that is determined to be a causal factor in what happened here. Now, the next question becomes, where does maintenance play a role in this? And we don't know the answer to that yet because we don't know what maintenance may or may not have been performed by Air India in the interim period. We also don't know what sort of emphasis may have been placed on these issues by Boeing or the FAA so that Air India may or may not have been aware of this problem sufficiently and may or may not have known to do the maintenance.
Okay. So, Tony, in those documents, like, what was the recommendation by the FAA?
So again, in those documents, the recommendation is to withdraw, remove, and replace certain couplings in areas of the aircraft that leak. And those couplings are to be replaced with new designs which have a better fastening and closure mechanisms, the way we understand it. Additionally, sealant, caulking was to be replaced and installed in areas where there are seat tracks that are exposed where water can again run into these electronic equipment bays.
Okay. And like, do you know, like in the newer 787 which are coming out later, like let's say 10 years after the first manufacturing, like these designs are already being implemented, or are they still delivering the old previous designs?
We would certainly hope that they've learned from their previous mistakes. We've not seen documentation on the new planes coming off the line. One of the questions that we will continue to have here is what role something called ODA may hold here in the certification process. ODA is a process at Boeing by which Boeing employees who are on the Boeing payroll act as federal inspectors and federal certification officials, and they inspect Boeing equipment and certify whether or not it meets the applicable standards and regulations. So one question we will have is whether or not the problems that currently exist according to the FAA and Boeing documents were somehow missed by the ODA process. And so then that obviously extends to what changes, if any, have been made going forward with new aircraft. We just simply don't know what changes they may have implemented on the new aircraft that are coming off, but I would expect and certainly hope that Boeing has learned from prior mistakes and is not continuing to manufacture aircraft with leaking water lines.
Rani, why do you think this ODA process might be dangerous?
Well, obviously there is a manifest conflict of interest when you have a company acting to self-certify its own products. And it can be a situation that is ripe for abuse if it's not managed properly. And so we know that in the past, certainly, speaking to prior cases, that the ODA process has come under fire for allowing Boeing to have too much control over the certification of processes and equipment that may or may not be fully compliant with the applicable regulations.
Okay. So, Rani, what is the timeline that you are looking into? Like, when would you start filing these cases?
So we typically don't approach this with an arbitrary timeline. We don't say we're going to file something within so many months of a certain date. We prefer to let the data drive the investigation and let us know what happened, who may be responsible, why it happened, and how to hold them accountable. And so any decision to file cases will be based on how the investigation is proceeding and where the information leads us. Certainly, I would hope to have something advanced in terms of our investigation far before the 1 year release of the final report.
Okay. So, Adani, like in previous cases, like for example, MH370, like those cases were rejected by the US courts. So, like, what do you have to say about like any relation with this case?
Well, one of the models that we can draw from prior cases would be the Ethiopian Airlines crash of a 737 MAX outside of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And in that case, individual cases were filed in the United States in federal court on behalf of victims' families and consolidated for the purposes of discovery. But then the economic and individual value of each case was worked up separately as we got closer to the trial dates. It's difficult to say how each case proceeds or each crash may affect other crashes or other circumstances. In this case, we would say, however, that if it is shown that there is a link between the leaks in the water lines, between the information that we've uncovered from the FAA and Boeing documents, then our contention would be that the decisions about those designs were made in the United States. The planes were manufactured in the United States. The individuals with that knowledge would be in the United States. The documents would be in the United States. And so all of the relevant information, individuals, and work occurred within the United States. So certainly we think that it's appropriate to, if Boeing is determined to be responsible, to bring these cases in the United States.